The rain fell in heavy sheets, blurring the edges of the world outside the grand glass windows of the Crestwood Manor. Inside, a girl sat motionless in her wheelchair, her delicate hands folded neatly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the empty banquet hall. It was her 17th birthday, and the room, adorned with golden streamers and a towering cake that could have fed a village, was as silent as a tomb. Eleanor Grayson, daughter of a billionaire CEO, was surrounded by opulence but utterly alone. The staff whispered in the corners, their pitying glances darting toward her like arrows she couldn't dodge. Her father, Richard Grayson, was halfway across the globe, closing another deal, his absence a familiar ache in her chest. Her mother had passed years ago, and her friends, well, they'd dwindled after the accident that stole her legs and, it seemed, her place in their world. The clock ticked toward 7 p.m., and not a single guest had arrived. The weight of her loneliness pressed harder than the paralysis ever could, and yet, in that vast, echoing hall, no one moved to fill the void. Until a stranger did. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of human connection, please hit that like button, drop a comment with your thoughts, share this story with someone who needs it, and subscribe to Kindness Speaks for more stories that remind us of the beauty in humanity. And if this story touches you, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Please include the word hope in your comment to let us know you're with us. Eleanor hadn't always been alone. Before the accident, she was the golden child of Crestwood High, her laughter filling the halls, her track medals gleaming in her bedroom. She was the girl who could outrun the wind, whose smile made even strangers feel seen. But 2 years ago, a drunk driver had careened into her family's car, leaving her spine shattered and her dreams in pieces. Her father, consumed by his empire, threw money at her recovery, state-of-the-art wheelchairs, the best therapists, a sprawling mansion renovated for accessibility, but he couldn't give her what she needed most: time. His calls were brief, his visits briefer, each one laced with apologies that felt more like formalities. The friends who once crowded her birthday parties faded, their excuses growing thinner until they stopped coming altogether. "It's hard to see her like this," one had whispered to another, not realizing Eleanor could hear. The words cut deeper than the crash ever had. Now, on her 17th birthday, the banquet hall was a cruel mirror of her isolation. The staff had decorated it meticulously, following her father's orders, but the chairs remained empty, the balloons sagging under the weight of unfulfilled expectations. Eleanor's chestnut hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders, her emerald eyes dulled by the ache of abandonment. She stared at the cake, its 17 unlit candles mocking her, and wondered if anyone would notice if she simply wheeled herself away. Across town, in a modest apartment cluttered with toy trucks and crayon drawings, Daniel Harper was fighting a battle of his own. A single father at 32, he carried the weight of raising his 6-year-old son, Noah, while juggling 2 jobs to keep their heads above water. His wife had left when Noah was 2, chasing a life unburdened by responsibility, and Daniel had never quite filled the hole she left. His days were a blur of construction sites, diner shifts, and bedtime stories, his hands calloused but his heart soft for the boy who was his entire world. Noah, with his mop of curly brown hair and eyes that sparkled with curiosity, was the reason Daniel kept going, even when exhaustion threatened to swallow him whole. That evening, as the rain battered their small apartment, Noah tugged at Daniel's sleeve, pointing to a crumpled invitation he'd found in his backpack. It was for Eleanor's birthday party, a girl from his school's community outreach program, where Noah sometimes joined other kids to visit the big house on the hill. Daniel had never met Eleanor, but Noah spoke of her often, how she told stories about stars, how her wheelchair was super cool, how she smiled even when she looked sad. The invitation was a formality, sent to the entire program, but Noah's insistence was anything but. "We have to go, Dad," he said, his small voice firm. Daniel glanced at the clock, then at the storm outside, his body screaming for rest. But something in Noah's eyes, a flicker of hope, a belief that they could make a difference, pulled him toward the car keys. The drive to Crestwood Manor was treacherous, the rain turning roads into rivers, but Daniel navigated with the steady focus of a man who'd faced worse storms. Noah clutched a handmade card, its edges uneven from his careful cuts, a drawing of a girl in a wheelchair under a sky full of stars. "It's for Eleanor," he'd explained, his pride radiating. Daniel didn't know what to expect at the manor. Probably a room full of rich kids and their distracted parents, but he couldn't say no to Noah. When they arrived, the mansion loomed like a castle, its lights glowing through the downpour. A butler ushered them inside, his expression a mix of surprise and relief. The banquet hall was a shock. Vast, glittering, and empty, save for one girl in a wheelchair at its center. Eleanor's head was bowed, her fingers tracing the edge of her dress, as if trying to anchor herself to something real. The staff hovered at the edges, their whispers a soft hum of pity. Daniel's heart clenched. He knew loneliness, not the kind that came from an empty room, but the kind that lived in your bones, no matter who was around. He'd felt it every night after Noah went to bed, when the silence reminded him of all he'd lost. Seeing Eleanor, he recognized that same hollow ache. Noah, oblivious to the weight of the moment, bounded forward, his sneakers squeaking on the polished floor. He thrust the card at Eleanor, his grin wide enough to light the room. She looked up, startled, her eyes meeting his with a mix of confusion and caution. Daniel followed, his work boots heavy against the marble, his flannel shirt out of place among the chandeliers. He introduced himself, his voice rough but kind, explaining that Noah had insisted they come. Eleanor's gaze flickered to the card, then back to Noah, and for the first time that night, a small smile curved her lips. It was fragile, like a crack in ice, but it was there. Daniel saw the staff exchange glances, their whispers fading as they watched the scene unfold. He didn't know Eleanor's story, not yet, but he knew enough to see she was drowning in her solitude. He pulled up a chair, ignoring the grandeur around him, and started talking, not about the weather or the mansion, but about Noah's love for constellations, how he'd named their goldfish Orion. Noah chimed in, his words tumbling over each other, and Eleanor listened, her eyes softening with each story. The room, so cold and empty moments before, began to warm with their voices. As the night wore on, Daniel learned pieces of Eleanor's world. She spoke quietly, her voice steady but laced with a guardedness that came from too many betrayals. She mentioned her father's absence, the accident that changed everything, the friends who'd vanished when her life became too hard. Daniel didn't push, but he shared his own struggles, raising Noah alone, the long hours, the fear of not being enough. There was no pity in his words, just truth, and Eleanor seemed to cling to it, as if honesty was a language she'd forgotten. Noah, restless and full of energy, convinced her to let him push her wheelchair in a race around the hall, their laughter echoing off the walls. The staff watched, some wiping tears, others smiling for the first time all evening. Daniel caught Eleanor's eye during one of Noah's dramatic retellings, and he saw something shift, a spark of hope, faint but undeniable. For the first time, she didn't look like the CEO's daughter or the girl in the wheelchair. She looked like Eleanor, a girl who could still laugh, who could still dream. The night wasn't perfect, the rain didn't stop, and the empty chairs remained a silent reminder of those who hadn't come. But as Daniel and Noah prepared to leave, Eleanor reached for Daniel's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "For seeing me." Daniel nodded, unable to find words, his throat tight with the weight of her gratitude. Noah hugged her, promising to bring her a new drawing next time, and Eleanor's smile lingered as they walked into the storm. In the days that followed, Daniel and Noah became regulars at the manor, their visits a lifeline for Eleanor. She began to open up, sharing her love for astronomy, her dreams of studying the stars. Daniel, inspired by her resilience, started saving for a telescope, determined to show her the sky she loved. Eleanor's father, alerted by the staff, began calling more often, his voice softer, his apologies heavier. The change was slow, but it was real. Eleanor's world, once confined to the walls of her loneliness, began to expand, one small connection at a time. Months later, on a clear night, Daniel and Noah surprised Eleanor with a telescope set up in the manor's garden. She wheeled herself outside, her breath catching as she peered through the lens at a sky ablaze with stars. Noah pointed out constellations, his voice a mix of excitement and awe, while Daniel stood back, watching the girl who'd been alone find her place in the universe. Eleanor's eyes shone, not with tears but with wonder, and for the first time in years, she felt whole. The accident had taken her legs, but it hadn't taken her spirit, and now, thanks to a single dad and his son, she remembered what it felt like to be seen. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of the power of kindness and the beauty of second chances, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs a little hope, and subscribe to Kindness Speaks for more stories that lift the soul. And in the comments, please include the word hope to let us know this story moved you. We'd love to hear how it made you feel. Your thoughts mean the world to us.